The envelope sat on my doorstep like a quiet threat. Plain white, no markings, no warmth. Just my name, printed in cold black ink. At first, I thought it was some sort of bank notice or maybe another meaningless form from work. But the moment I picked it up, I felt a strange heaviness in my hands, as if the paper already knew what it carried inside. I tore it open. My breath caught halfway through the first line. Notice of court proceedings, filed by Mr. William Harris, my father. For a moment, I just stared at the words, my mind refusing to understand. My father, the man who taught me to ride a bike, who once lifted me on his shoulders so I could see fireworks over the city skyline, was now taking me to court. It didn't make sense. The room blurred for a second, and I had to sit down. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages, scanning paragraph after paragraph of legal language that felt like a foreign tongue. Property claims, asset disputes, custodial signatures. Every line, every word felt like a knife twisting deeper. He wasn't just suing me. He was demanding everything. Our family home, the business I'd spent years rebuilding after Mom's passing, even the savings I had in our joint account, money I thought he'd left untouched out of respect. I could hear the clock ticking behind me, steady and cruel. I wanted to call him, to ask if this was some kind of mistake, but deep down, a quiet voice whispered, "No mistake." It's strange how silence can be louder than any scream. That afternoon, my apartment was filled with it. I could almost hear my own memories echoing off the walls. His laughter, his advice, his old phrases that used to guide me. Always stand up for what's right. Never let anyone take what's yours. Family above everything. The same man who said those words had just turned them into weapons against me. I leaned back on the couch and closed my eyes, trying to trace where things had gone wrong. It hadn't always been this way. There was a time when we were inseparable, father and daughter against the world. I was his little shadow, following him to the workshop, learning how to fix things, how to run numbers, how to manage clients. After Mom passed away, I thought we would grow even closer. We had only each other. But grief changes people. At first, it was small things. Him missing dinner, staying longer at work, locking his office door more often. Then came the cold mornings when he barely spoke, the dismissive nods when I tried to help. He started talking about the business differently, not our company, but his. When I asked about expanding or modernizing, he brushed it off, saying, "You wouldn't understand." I did, more than he realized. For years, I studied every detail of the company, the clients, the contracts, the people who depended on us. I poured my energy into keeping it alive when he grew too tired or too stubborn to change. When he finally retired 2 years ago, he told me I could handle it. That he trusted me. He even smiled when he handed me the keys to the office. I remember thinking that was his way of saying, "I'm proud of you." I was wrong. The betrayal didn't come all at once. It arrived in pieces. A closed-door meeting I wasn't invited to, a lawyer calling about joint ownership documents. And now this, a court summons, filed by the one man I never thought I'd have to defend myself against. I folded the papers and placed them on the table, but they seemed to stare back at me, mocking my disbelief. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. My chest burned with something deeper, confusion tangled with heartbreak. Why would he do this? Why now? Had I said something? Done something? Maybe it was the new contract I signed last month, the one that finally pulled the company out of debt. Maybe he felt I'd taken too much control. Maybe someone whispered in his ear, someone who wanted me gone. I didn't know. But one thing was certain. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was personal. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, stern, disappointed, distant. I remembered the day he taught me how to drive, his hand steady on the wheel. The day I graduated, his rare smile as he clapped from the crowd. I remembered the moment he hugged me after Mom's funeral, the only time I'd ever seen him cry. And now all those moments felt hollow, like pieces of a story that never truly belonged to me. At 3 a.m., I got up, poured a glass of water, and stared out the window. The city lights flickered like tiny sparks, some fading, some fighting to stay alive. That's when I made a silent promise to myself. If he wanted a court battle, I'd face it. But I wouldn't fight out of hatred. I'd fight for truth. I didn't know how yet, or what those two words would eventually be, but I knew this much. I wouldn't let him erase everything I'd built. Because deep down I still loved him, and that was the hardest part. I turned back toward the table, where the envelope still lay open, a symbol of everything that had changed in one cruel afternoon. My voice was barely a whisper, but the words left my mouth before I could stop them. I never imagined the man who taught me to stand up for truth would now stand against me. The night after receiving the summons, sleep refused to find me. Every time I closed my eyes, memories came alive. Some warm, others sharp enough to cut through silence. They came in flashes, like fragments of a life I once believed was unbreakable. I saw myself as a little girl again, standing at the edge of my father's workshop, the air filled with the smell of fresh wood and engine oil. He was younger then, strong, confident, with a face that carried both authority and quiet kindness. I used to think he could fix anything. Machines, furniture, even people. "Hand me that wrench, kiddo," he'd say, and I'd scramble to find it, eager to please. When he tightened the bolts or hammered the wood, I believed that was what strength looked like. Control, precision, silence. I didn't know then that silence can also build walls. Growing up, my world revolved around him. Mom was gentle, always patient, always the bridge between us. But Dad, he was the mountain I wanted to climb. Distant, demanding, but rewarding when I reached the top. When I got my first report card, straight A's across the board, I remember running into the house, waving the paper like a trophy. "Dad, look! I topped the class." He looked up from his desk, adjusted his glasses, and nodded. "Good, that's what I expect." That was all. No hug, no smile. Just expectation. Mom tried to make up for it later, baking a small cake that said "proud of you" in shaky icing. But even as a child, I noticed how empty the house felt when he wasn't proud out loud. As years passed, that pattern never changed. Every achievement, my scholarship, my first job, my decision to join the family business, was met with quiet approval, never celebration. He loved results, not emotions. He believed emotions made people weak. "Control your feelings, or they'll control you," he used to tell me. I tried to live by that rule, until I realized it wasn't strength. It was fear disguised as discipline. After Mom passed away, the cracks between us turned into canyons. The house felt colder. The meals quieter. The walls thinner, but our hearts further apart. He stopped eating at the table. He'd eat in his office instead. The sound of his footsteps down the hall became predictable. Firm, measured, always stopping before my door, never knocking. Sometimes I'd hear him talking to her picture, his voice low, breaking in places. And though part of me wanted to comfort him, something about his grief felt guarded. Like he was mourning privately because sharing it would make him vulnerable. I mourned differently, loudly, openly, desperately. And maybe that difference was where we truly lost each other. When I joined the family business, I thought it would bring us closer again. It didn't. He treated me like an intern, correcting every move, questioning every idea. Once, during a meeting, I suggested we move our operations online to attract more clients. He interrupted halfway, his tone sharp. "You think running a company is like running a social media page?" The room went silent. I felt small, humiliated. But I smiled, pretending it didn't hurt. Later, he pulled me aside. "You need to learn your place before you start changing mine." That night, I cried quietly in the office bathroom, promising myself I'd never let him see me break. But not everything was pain. There were good days, too. Days that make the betrayal harder to understand. Like the time he stayed up all night fixing the generator when the power went out during a storm, so I could finish my college application. Or the time he slipped a note under my door before my first big presentation. "Do what your mother would have done, smile and prove them wrong." He was never good with words, but I learned to read between his silences. I convinced myself that behind every stern look, there was care. Behind every criticism, there was pride. But care should never hurt this much. Looking back now, maybe I ignored the warning signs because I wanted so badly to believe we were fine. There were moments, small, fleeting, that hinted at his pride and control growing into something darker. Like when he refused to let me sign my own contracts, or when he quietly changed the company paperwork, putting everything under his name for safety. When I asked him why, he just said, "Because I know better." I didn't argue. I never did. I thought obeying him meant loving him. I thought silence meant peace, but peace built on fear always shatters. After Mom's death anniversary last year, I found him sitting in her garden chair, staring at the roses she planted. "They're dying," he muttered. "No one takes care of things anymore." I told him I'd replant them in spring. That maybe change was what they needed. He didn't reply. He just looked at me, not with love, not even with anger, but with something colder. Like he saw me not as his daughter, but as a stranger living in the house he built. That look haunted me for weeks. Now, as I think of that moment again, it all makes sense. That wasn't disappointment. It was resentment. He'd built his life on control, and I had unknowingly taken it away from him. It hurts, even now, to admit that the man who once carried me on his shoulders could turn against me over something as small as pride. Maybe that's what pride does. It blinds people to love. As dawn crept through my window, I realized something had changed inside me. The girl who once sought his approval was gone. All that remained was a woman who finally understood the truth, that love doesn't mean surrender, and silence doesn't mean respect. If I had to face him in court, I'd do it with the same strength he once taught me, but I'd use it differently. Not to destroy him, but to defend myself. Not to prove him wrong, but to prove that I could still stand for what's right. I picked up the court papers again, my fingers steadier this time. The fear was still there, but it no longer ruled me. My heart whispered the words that would carry me through every sleepless night that followed. If he wanted a war, I'd fight it with truth, not hatred. The morning the petition arrived, I was still half asleep when the doorbell rang. The sound felt heavier than usual, a sharp echo through the quiet house. When I opened the door, the courier handed me a thick envelope, stamped and sealed with my father's lawyer's insignia. For a moment, I thought it had to be a mistake. My father? A legal notice? But as soon as I saw his signature at the bottom of the first page, my stomach dropped. The words blurred in front of my eyes. Petition for full ownership and liquidation of shared assets, including the family home, bank accounts, and business holdings. Each line cut deeper than the last. I felt my chest tighten, like the air had been sucked out of the room. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages, line after line of cold, calculated claims. My father wasn't just challenging me. He was stripping away everything that connected us. I sank onto the couch, the papers slipping from my grip. The memories of our home flashed before me. The dining table where we once shared meals, the garden he and I planted when I was 8, the office where he used to let me spin in his chair while he worked. And now all of it. Just assets on a list. When I told my mother, her silence said more than words ever could. Her eyes were red, her lips pressed tight. "He's gone too far," she whispered, her voice shaking. "He's not the man I married anymore." Friends started calling, some with sympathy, others with the quiet thrill of gossip. "I heard your father's suing you?" one asked cautiously. "Must be about the business, right?" Another chimed in, trying to sound casual. Every conversation felt like another wound. People didn't see the years behind this moment, the years of control, of living under his expectations, of trying to prove I was enough. To them, it was just a scandal. To me, it was a heartbreak. At night, I'd stare at the ceiling, replaying every memory, every decision that led us here. I tried to convince myself there had to be a misunderstanding. Maybe he was angry about something I said. Maybe his lawyers pushed him into this. But deep down, I knew the truth. This was deliberate. My father was making a statement. He wanted to show the world that without his name, I was nothing. The next morning, I sat at my desk, the petition spread out before me. Every sentence was a reminder of how far we'd fallen. Once he'd been my hero, the man who told me never to let anyone silence my voice. Now he was trying to silence it himself. Tears blurred my vision as I whispered to no one in particular, "Why, Dad? Why this way?" But there was no answer. Just the hum of the ceiling fan and the rustle of papers that once held the weight of our bond. Word spread fast. By the end of the week, even distant relatives were calling to check in, pretending to care while fishing for details. Social media became its own battlefield. Subtle posts, cryptic comments, and whispers about family disputes that everyone seemed to know more about than I did. The betrayal wasn't just legal, it was personal, emotional, and public. It wasn't enough for him to win in court. He wanted to destroy my name, to make me small in the eyes of everyone who once respected me. One evening, as I sat in the quiet of my empty home, I picked up the petition again. My tears had dried, replaced by something colder. Resolve. I traced his signature at the bottom of the last page, the same signature that once signed my report cards, my birthday cards, my first paycheck from the family business. Now, that signature had become a declaration of war, and as I closed the file and set it aside, I felt the first spark of strength return to me. He wanted control. He wanted power, but this time I wouldn't crumble. Because he wasn't just taking me to court, he was erasing me. The courtroom felt colder than I had imagined, not because of the air conditioning or the marble floors, but because of the silence that lingered, heavy, watchful, and suffocating. The walls were lined with dark wood panels that reflected the harsh light above, giving everything a tone of authority I couldn't quite breathe under. I stood at the entrance for a moment, my heart pounding against my ribs, watching lawyers shuffle papers and clerks whisper to one another. It was strange how something so ordinary, people in suits, wooden benches, files stacked in neat rows, could feel like the stage for a war I never wanted to fight. My palms were damp, and I could hear the faint echo of my heels on the floor as I walked to my seat. Each step felt like a reminder of the distance between who I used to be, a daughter, and who I had become, a defendant. Then I saw him, my father, sitting at the opposite table. His posture was perfect, his expression unreadable. That same commanding presence I'd grown up around now looked almost colder. There was no flicker of hesitation, no warmth in his eyes, only an unspoken message. "You brought this on yourself." He didn't even nod when our eyes met. Just turned to his lawyer and whispered something, lips barely moving, face calm and composed. I felt something tighten in my chest, a mix of anger and heartbreak. How could the same man who once held my hand through thunderstorms now refuse to even acknowledge me? My lawyer, Mr. Hanif, a calm man in his early 50s, leaned toward me. "Stay strong," he said quietly. "He'll try to rattle you. Don't give him that power." I nodded, though my throat was dry. My hands were trembling as I adjusted the documents in front of me, pretending to focus. The judge entered, a woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for fairness. Everyone rose. For a brief moment, I wondered what she'd think if she knew the truth behind all this. That this wasn't just about property or money. It was about pride. It was about a father teaching his daughter a lesson she didn't deserve. The hearing began. My father's lawyer stood first, confident and smooth. His voice echoed through the room as he laid out their case, calm, logical, methodical. Every word felt like a blade cloaked in politeness. "My client," he said, "seeks rightful control of assets that were, for years, mismanaged under emotional decisions rather than sound judgment." I froze. Emotional decisions? Was that how he saw me? After everything I had done to keep the business running when he fell ill? After all the nights I'd stayed awake, working to save what he built? My eyes darted toward him again, but he didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. Then came our turn. My lawyer rose, adjusting his glasses, and began to speak with quiet conviction. "Your Honor," he said, "this is not a case of mismanagement. This is a case of control, of a father refusing to let his daughter stand on her own." The courtroom stirred. A few heads turned. My father's lawyer frowned slightly, scribbling notes. "But my father," he only smirked. That small, knowing smirk, the one that used to mean, "I'm disappointed in you." When the judge asked for my statement, my pulse quickened. My lawyer gave a small nod. I stood, feeling the weight of every pair of eyes in the room. My voice trembled at first, barely above a whisper. I never thought I'd stand here. Not against my own father. I paused, steadying my breath. He taught me to fight for what's right, to never lie even when the truth hurts. And yet here I am, fighting for the very truth he once told me to live by. A faint murmur spread across the room. I could feel the heat behind my eyes, but I didn't let the tears fall. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. The judge's expression softened for a brief second before she nodded for me to sit down. The rest of the hearing blurred into a haze of legal language and procedural talk, but my mind stayed locked on one thing: his silence. He didn't defend himself. He didn't react. He just watched, calculating, as if every word I spoke was part of some performance he'd already rehearsed. When the session ended, the judge announced that proceedings would continue in 2 weeks. The gavel struck once, a sharp final sound that echoed through the room like a heartbeat. As everyone began to leave, I gathered my papers slowly. My father stood and adjusted his coat, his eyes briefly meeting mine. There was no warmth there, no regret, only a calm indifference that chilled me more than anger ever could. He walked past me without a word. For a moment, I wanted to call out, to remind him that this was me, his daughter, not some stranger on the other side of a legal battle. But the words never came. Outside the courtroom, I leaned against the wall, breathing deeply, trying to steady my shaking hands. The city noise filtered in through the tall glass doors, honking cars, footsteps, life moving on. But for me, everything had stopped inside that room. That was the day I realized this fight wasn't just about winning. It was about surviving, with my dignity intact. And as I stared at the courthouse steps bathed in the afternoon sun, I made a silent vow to myself. I'd make him see the truth, no matter how long it took. The days after the first hearing felt heavier than before, as if every moment carried the weight of a truth I hadn't yet uncovered. I tried to distract myself with work, with routines, with noise. But silence always found me. It crept into the spaces between tasks, between thoughts, whispering one question again and again. Why? Why would my father do this to me? I knew him. Or at least I thought I did. The man who raised me wasn't cruel. He was proud, stubborn, and hard to please, yes, but not cruel. Something about this case didn't feel entirely his. The words in that petition, the tone, the phrasing, it sounded like someone else's hand had guided it. That thought became my obsession. I began reading through every document my lawyer had collected: property records, business contracts, email copies, even old board meeting notes. I stayed up late night after night, the soft hum of my laptop the only sound in the room. Somewhere in the endless lines of legal text, I hoped to find a clue, something that would tell me this wasn't truly him. Then one evening, while scanning through scanned pages of financial correspondence, I noticed something strange. A transfer made a few months before the case began, a large sum withdrawn from one of his private accounts. The recipient? A company name I didn't recognize. Blue Oak Holdings, I read aloud. The name felt off. I searched through our business history. Nothing. No contracts, no previous connections. The next day, I went to visit an old accountant who had worked for our company years ago. Mr. Raymond, a man who had always liked me for my curiosity and honesty. His eyes widened slightly when I mentioned Blue Oak. "Your father's new partner," he said quietly. "The woman he married after your mother passed. Her cousin runs that firm." My breath caught. "You mean Nadia?" He hesitated, then nodded. "She's been attending meetings lately. Silent observer mostly, but everyone knows she's the one whispering in his ear now." I sat there stunned. It all began to make sense. The sudden changes in his tone, his distance, the coldness that didn't used to be there. Nadia, the second wife who always smiled too perfectly, whose compliments felt rehearsed, whose eyes watched more than they saw. I thanked him and left, but my heart was racing. The truth wasn't far now. I could feel it. That night, I returned to my father's old study, the one he rarely entered after remarrying. The room smelled faintly of dust and paper, but the air carried memories of nights we'd spent discussing business plans, of the way he'd proudly tell me, "You've got my mind, kid. Just sharper." I went through the drawers one by one. Old reports, receipts, letters. Then, at the back of the lowest drawer, tucked beneath a stack of folders, I found an envelope sealed with his handwriting. Unmistakable. My name written across it in his familiar cursive, "To my daughter, if you ever need to understand." My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a letter, not long but heavy with meaning. The ink had slightly faded, and the words looked rushed, emotional. I know I've made mistakes. Maybe more than I can count. I was never good at showing weakness, and I feared losing control over the business, over the family, over myself. When your mother died, I lost the only person who saw through that pride. And when you started standing up to me, I mistook your strength for defiance. Maybe that's why I pushed you away. I swallowed hard, my eyes burning. If I ever hurt you because of my pride, remember this. It was fear, not hate. Fear that you'd outgrow me, fear that you wouldn't need me anymore. I don't know if I'll ever be brave enough to say this to your face, but know that I am proud of you, even when I pretend not to be. The paper trembled in my hands. The room felt smaller, quieter. I sat on the edge of his old chair, the letter pressed against my chest, trying to breathe through the ache that filled me. So it wasn't hate after all. It was fear, the same fear that had always guided his decisions. Fear of losing control, of being forgotten, of being less than the man he thought he needed to be. Still, I knew there was more to it. Someone had taken that fear and twisted it, weaponized it against him. Whether it was Nadia, her cousin, or someone in the business, I didn't know yet. But I would find out. The next morning, I met my lawyer with renewed determination. We went through records of company meetings and found that several decisions my father supposedly approved had been signed electronically, not in person, from devices that weren't his. My lawyer raised an eyebrow. "Someone's been using his name," he said grimly. It was the confirmation I needed. The case wasn't just about pride anymore. It was manipulation, maybe even fraud. I felt something ignite in me that I hadn't felt in weeks, a spark of clarity, of strength. I wasn't going to let this destroy him or me. As I looked at the folded letter once more before locking it away safely, I whispered to myself, he wasn't evil, just lost, but I had to win this and for both of us. The second hearing arrived faster than I expected, and with it came a storm I wasn't prepared for. The courtroom looked the same, polished wood panels, the scent of paper and old air, the weight of unspoken judgment, but everything felt different now. This time the silence wasn't mine alone. It was shared by those who had come to watch, to whisper, to see what would become of the daughter who dared to fight her own father. I walked in wearing calm like a mask. My lawyer whispered reassuring words beside me, but my hands trembled despite my grip on the table. Across the aisle, my father sat still, composed, distant, unreadable. But there was something new about him. Nadia sat behind him, her expression polished, coldly sympathetic, like a performer waiting for her cue. When the judge entered, the air changed again, thick, expectant. The lawyers rose, the sound of chairs scraping across marble echoing like a ritual. "Case number 341, the judge announced, his tone steady. "Proceed." My father's lawyer, a man I'd never seen before, rose confidently. "Your Honor, my client seeks rightful ownership of the family estate, business shares, and all related properties, assets originally built under his supervision and financial guidance." Every word landed like a weight. I wanted to speak, to shout that I'd worked for everything, that my sweat and sleepless nights had built half of what he was claiming. But I had to stay silent. My turn would come. Then the lawyer turned toward me. "We also submit evidence suggesting that the defendant misused company funds for personal benefit, transferring money into private accounts without consent." My stomach dropped. My lawyer stood immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. There's no verified proof of these claims." The judge nodded slowly. "Noted. Proceed carefully, counselor." But the damage was done. I could already feel the room shift. People whispering, journalists scribbling, misused funds. The words echoed in my head like a curse. I looked at my father, hoping, begging silently, that he'd stop this madness, that he'd see the pain his silence was causing. But he didn't look at me, not once. His eyes stayed fixed on the papers before him, as if this wasn't even happening. When my turn came, my lawyer guided me to the stand. I took the oath, my voice barely steady. My palms were slick with sweat, and I could feel every heartbeat in my throat. "Tell the court your side," the judge said, his voice softer now, as if he could sense my trembling. I inhaled deeply. "I didn't take anything that wasn't mine," I began. "I worked with my father for over a decade. I built that company with him. The late nights, the expansion deals, the client negotiations. I was there for all of it. I never stole from him. I only ever tried to make him proud." A pause. Then my father's lawyer began cross-examining. His tone was sharp, deliberate. "Miss Rahim, is it true that you held executive power of attorney during your father's illness?" "Yes," I said quietly. "And is it true that during that time, several company assets were moved into a secondary account under your signature?" I hesitated. "Yes, but those were transfers authorized by him." "By him?" The lawyer's eyebrows lifted. "Or by you? I have proof of his verbal approval," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "Verbal?" he repeated, smiling faintly. "How convenient." The courtroom murmured. My throat tightened. It wasn't supposed to go this way. Every word was twisted, every truth reshaped until it sounded like deceit. My eyes darted to my father, still silent, still cold. And that silence, it hurt more than any accusation could. The lawyer pushed harder, trying to make me crumble. "You benefited financially, didn't you? You had motive. You wanted control." Something inside me snapped. My voice rose, not with anger, but with heartbreak. "Control? Do you think this is what control looks like? Losing my father, my home, my peace, because I worked too hard? Because I wanted to protect what my mother built before she died?" The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge looked up. Tears burned my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "You think I wanted any of this? I wanted my father to stand beside me, not against me. I wanted to build, not fight." The lawyer frowned, sensing his line of attack had gone too far. The judge cleared his throat gently. "You may step down for now, Miss Rahim." I walked back to my seat, each step heavier than the last. My body felt numb, my spirit bruised. My lawyer leaned close. "You did well," he whispered, but I could barely hear him. Then something unexpected happened. As I sat down, I noticed a familiar face in the back row. Mr. Hanif, my mother's old lawyer. He hadn't been part of our lives for years, but his eyes met mine with quiet empathy. During a recess, he approached me in the hallway, speaking softly. "I've been following the case," he said. "And I think you should look into the property deed from 2018. There's a clause that could change everything." "What clause?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "One your father's current lawyer probably doesn't want you to remember. The one your mother added before she passed." My heart skipped. That deed was part of my mother's will, the one she had amended to protect her share from being transferred without mutual consent. If that clause still stood, then my father's claim was weaker than anyone realized. When court resumed, my lawyer hinted at the discovery, subtly shifting the energy in the room. The judge's expression changed, from passive to curious. My father looked uneasy for the first time. It was working. The truth was starting to flicker through the fog of lies. As the session ended and people began to leave, Nadia's polished smile faltered. She whispered something to my father, but he didn't respond. He just sat there, still, staring at the empty witness stand. I turned to glance back at him one last time before leaving the room. For a brief moment, I saw it. Not anger, not hatred, but something else in his eyes. Doubt, maybe even regret. That night, as I replayed everything in my head, the lies, the humiliation, the silent stares, I realized one thing with absolute clarity. They wanted to break me. But I had one truth left to reveal. The morning of the third hearing arrived with a strange calm. the kind that comes just before a storm changes direction. I'd barely slept the night before, my mind replaying every word Mr. Hanif had told me. The 2018 deed, the clause my mother had added, the safeguard she'd left behind, one final act of love to protect both of us. My lawyer and I spent the entire night combing through old digital archives, scanning signed documents, chasing trails of paperwork. And then, there it was, buried deep inside an overlooked appendix, a clause written in her careful, deliberate handwriting. No ownership claim or transfer of assets shall be executed without mutual consent from both designated heirs, ensuring preservation of family equity and moral integrity of the estate. It was clear. The company, the properties, everything my father was fighting to take, could not legally be claimed without my consent. That clause invalidated his entire petition. But it wasn't just about the document anymore. It was about the truth behind why this had happened, why a father had turned against his own daughter. I found the answer the next morning. While reviewing the court's shared digital records, I noticed a strange submission, an audio file accidentally included in one of my father's lawyer's filings. It wasn't labeled, just an unremarkable Note 3 WAV. Out of curiosity, I played it. The voice that came through froze me in place. It was Nadia, her tone calm, persuasive, venom coated in honey. "You need to do this, Arif. She's taking control away from you. Once the company's under her name, you'll lose everything. File for ownership now, before she finds out about the clause." And then, his voice. My father's. "She wouldn't do that to me. She's my daughter." "She's your competition," Nadia replied smoothly. "She's already moved assets under her control. She doesn't want you. She wants your legacy." A pause. Then the sound of him sighing deeply, brokenly. "All right. Prepare the documents." The file ended. For a long time, I just sat there, the audio still echoing in my head, my breath shallow. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to hate her. But all I felt was an overwhelming ache. He had been manipulated, poisoned by fear and insecurity. The same fear his letter had confessed, the fear of being left behind. That day in court, the energy was different. My lawyer submitted 2 exhibits, the rediscovered clause and the authenticated audio recording. The judge listened in silence, his brows tightening as Nadia's voice filled the courtroom. Every word was like a blade cutting through weeks of deceit. When it ended, the silence that followed was deafening. Even the spectators didn't whisper. My father looked shaken, not angry, not defensive, just hollow. His lawyer stammered, trying to recover, but the damage was irreversible. The judge turned to my father. "Mr. Arif, do you have any response to these findings?" He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for a glass of water. I could see the truth hitting him, like a wave he couldn't fight. Finally, he spoke. His voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. I didn't know this was how it happened." He looked at me then, really looked at me. Not as an opponent, not as a threat, but as his daughter. The courtroom, the noise, the whispers, they all faded. For that one moment, it was just us. "I trusted the wrong people," he said quietly. I nodded, tears welling up. "And I never stopped trusting you, Dad, even when you made it impossible." He flinched at that, guilt flickering in his eyes. I didn't want to hurt him, but the truth had to be said. "This fight," I continued, my voice trembling, "was never about money. It was about losing the person I thought you were. I didn't care about the company or the estate. I cared about us." For a moment, he couldn't meet my gaze. His hand gripped the edge of the table, and I could see emotion fighting through the cracks of his pride. Nadia, sitting a few rows behind him, shifted uncomfortably. Her mask was slipping, and the courtroom could see it. The judge, unimpressed, warned that new charges might be considered for falsified influence and document manipulation. When the recess was called, I stayed seated watching him. He didn't move for a long time. Then, slowly, he turned to look at me again. His expression caught somewhere between pain and understanding. That was the moment everything shifted. Not the case, not the evidence, him. For the first time, I saw the man who'd once taught me how to ride a bike, who'd held my hand when I was afraid of storms, who'd told me that truth was the only weapon that never dulled. And I saw him remembering it too. As he stood to leave, our eyes met one final time before the next session. And in that brief silence, no words were spoken, but everything was said. When he looked at me that day, I saw regret flicker behind his anger. The day of the final hearing arrived like the closing act of a tragedy. Heavy skies, cold marble floors, and the smell of rain still clinging to everyone's coats. The courtroom was full. Reporters lined the back rows, friends and family filled the benches, and in the front sat my father, still proud, still silent, but no longer sure. Weeks of arguments, evidence, and emotion had led to this single moment. My lawyer had already presented the clause, the recording, the proof of manipulation. Legally, we'd already won. But my father's attorney wasn't ready to give up. He stood, tall and commanding, his voice echoing across the wooden hall. "Your Honor," he began, "let us not forget the true intention here. My client, Mr. Arif, merely sought to protect the integrity of his estate, to preserve what he built with his own hands. The opposition," he gestured toward me, "has twisted family matters into a courtroom spectacle, driven by emotion, not justice." He paused for effect, eyes sweeping the room. It is natural for a parent to act out of fear. Fear of losing control, fear of betrayal. But that fear does not make him guilty. It makes him human. Every word was crafted, rehearsed, like a well-written lie wearing the clothes of truth. The judge listened quietly. My father didn't look up once. He just sat there, staring at the papers in front of him, the weight of everything pressing down. When the lawyer finished, the courtroom went still. The judge turned to me. "Miss Arif, do you wish to respond?" I stood slowly. My hands didn't tremble this time. My heart didn't race. I'd spent months drowning in pain, anger, and confusion. But now, all that was left was clarity. I stepped forward, feeling every eye in the room on me. My father's lawyer gave a polite, condescending nod as if expecting another emotional outburst. But instead, I spoke softly. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady. He wasn't protecting what he built. He was protecting what he was afraid to lose. The judge tilted his head slightly, intrigued. I turned toward my father. He finally met my eyes. His face was pale, drawn, but his gaze held the same pride, the same stubborn fire I'd grown up fearing and admiring at once. For a heartbeat, we just stared at each other. Then I said it. The two words that ended everything. "I forgive." The sound was barely above a whisper, yet it carried across the courtroom like thunder. The air shifted. Even the judge's pen stopped mid-note. My father's lawyer blinked, thrown off. I beg your pardon," I repeated louder this time. "I forgive him." You could hear a pin drop. The judge leaned back slowly, his expression unreadable. "That's quite unexpected." But I wasn't speaking for the court anymore. I was speaking for the girl who'd cried over a lawsuit she didn't deserve, for the daughter who'd lost her father long before the case began. "I forgive him," I continued, turning fully toward my father. "Not because he deserves it, but because I refuse to carry his mistakes any longer. I won't let anger define me, or him." He stared at me as if I'd spoken a language he no longer understood. His mouth opened slightly, maybe to argue, maybe to apologize, but no sound came out. The judge cleared his throat, composing himself. "Well," he said softly, "forgiveness doesn't change the facts. The law stands. The petition is dismissed." The gavel struck once, sharp, final, but no one moved. My father sat frozen, his lawyer fumbling with papers that no longer mattered. The reporters whispered, pens scratching, trying to capture the moment they couldn't quite describe. A victory without triumph, a defeat without cruelty. I gathered my files and turned to leave. As I passed him, I stopped. He didn't look up, but I could see his hands shaking, his breath uneven. "I meant what I said," I whispered gently. "It's over, Dad, not just the case. The hate, too." For the first time in months, I saw tears fill his eyes. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. As I walked out into the corridor, the world outside felt lighter. Not because justice had been served, but because I'd finally laid down the weight I'd been carrying. Behind me, in that silent courtroom, a proud man sat speechless, not defeated by force, but undone by truth. And all it took were 2 words: I forgive. The next morning, the courtroom felt different, quieter, softer, as if the walls themselves knew that something had already ended before the gavel even fell. I walked in without fear this time. No trembling hands, no heavy breathing. Just calm acceptance. The judge entered, his robes swaying slightly as he took his seat. Everyone rose, then settled again in tense silence. My father sat at the front, shoulders low, eyes fixed on the floor. The proud, defiant man I'd once known now looked human, vulnerable. The clerk handed the judge a thick folder, the final ruling. Papers rustled, pens clicked, and the air tightened as we all waited for the words that would close this chapter forever. The judge adjusted his glasses. After thorough examination of evidence and witness statements, he began, voice steady, "This court finds no merit in the petitioner's claims. All properties and financial rights remain in the respondent's possession." He paused, looking directly at my father. "The court strongly advises both parties to seek reconciliation outside these walls. Family matters," he said softly, "are rarely resolved by law, but often by heart." He struck the gavel once. The case was over. The sound echoed like the closing of a heavy door. But to me, it didn't sound final. It sounded freeing. I turned toward my father. He hadn't moved. His hands rested on his knees, his wedding ring dull under the courtroom lights. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't look at me at all. But then slowly he did. There was no pride left in his eyes, just weariness, regret, and something that looked almost like shame. His lips trembled, but no words came. Instead, he gave a small nod. Barely there. But it was enough. It wasn't an apology in words. It was something deeper, an acknowledgement that everything he'd built to stand above me had finally crumbled, and in the ruins, there was nothing left but truth. I didn't gloat. I didn't cry. I simply nodded back. The reporters whispered. The lawyers packed up their papers and people started filing out. But I sat for a while longer, watching the man who had once been both my hero and my judge. He stood slowly, his movements heavy with years of pride and exhaustion. As he turned to leave, his voice broke the silence, soft, low, almost lost in the shuffle. "I thought I was protecting you," he said, not meeting my eyes. "But I was just protecting myself. It wasn't much, but it was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever get. And somehow it was enough." Outside, the sunlight hit me like a second chance. The courthouse steps stretched before me, each one feeling lighter than the last. People were talking, some congratulating me, others watching quietly. But their voices faded into the background. All I could hear was my own heartbeat, steady, sure, alive. I didn't walk away as a winner. I walked away as someone who finally understood that victory isn't about defeating others. It's about reclaiming yourself. When I reached the last step, I turned back for one final look. My father stood at the top of the stairs, a faint silhouette against the sunlight. For the first time in years, he looked smaller, not weak, but human. He didn't call my name. I didn't wave. But in that silent exchange, we both knew something had shifted. The war was over. And as I walked into the open air, I whispered to myself, half relief, half truth. I didn't win against my father. I won against the silence that divided us. Weeks passed after the verdict, but the echo of that courtroom still lived somewhere deep inside me. The sound of the gavel, the silence that followed, the way my father's eyes finally softened, they became pieces of a story I never thought I'd live. At first, I thought winning meant proving him wrong. I imagined walking out of that courtroom victorious, my pain justified. But as the noise faded and the world moved on, I realized something profound. It was never about the case, or the property, or even the inheritance. It was about finally understanding who I was, without his approval, without his validation. For so long, I'd carried the weight of being his child, molded by his expectations, silenced by his pride. desperate for his love. Every decision I made felt like a quiet plea for his acknowledgement. But standing alone that day, I found something I never had before, my own voice. And that voice didn't need to shout. It didn't need to prove anything. It just needed to speak the truth, calmly, firmly, and without hate. Family isn't always the people who share your blood. Sometimes, it's the people who stand beside you when the world turns away. It's the ones who remind you that love shouldn't hurt, and that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's freedom. I used to believe forgiveness meant letting someone back into your life. But now I know it's simply letting them go, freeing them from the role they played in your pain. My father and I haven't spoken much since that day. But I don't hold anger anymore. I hold understanding. He was a man built by fear. Fear of losing control, of losing respect, of being forgotten. And I was the daughter who finally taught him that control isn't love, and silence isn't strength. Life feels quieter now, but it's a peaceful quiet. The kind that comes after a storm when you realize you survived it. Not untouched, but unbroken. Sometimes I still think about those 2 words I whispered in court, the ones that ended everything. They weren't cruel or vengeful. They were simply the truth. And truth, I've learned, doesn't destroy. It frees. If there's one thing this journey taught me, it's that revenge doesn't always look like victory. Sometimes it looks like peace, the kind that no one can take away from you. As I close this chapter, I think back to the little girl who once sought her father's approval, and to the woman who finally stopped waiting for it. Both of them still live inside me, but now they walk hand in hand. Because forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's remembering without pain. And as the sun sets on this story, I'll leave you with the truth that guided me through every heartbreak, every silence, every courtroom whisper. Sometimes, the loudest revenge is the peace that follows truth.